And we're live. Hello. Live intro. Oh, yes. Coming through. Oh, we're coming through. Greetings, friends. This is everything you need to know about the history of House Targaryen. That's right. On House of the Dragon, we're going to see dragon lords flying around on dragons, of course, but also hatching dragons, having dragon dreams, discussing ancient prophecy and ancient Valyrian knowledge, marrying their uncles and nieces and brothers and sisters. And where does all this come from? Well, it comes from Old Valyria, of course, and maybe even a place older than that, before that. So we're going to go way back in the timeline today. Oh, yes. So, friends, welcome to the founding of House Targaryen, really the history of House Targaryen running all the way back through Valyria. So we're going to bring you from ancient day, from the Dawn Age, all the way up to that moment depicted on the cover image of the video, where Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys are conquering Westeros. So here we go, friends. We've got notes, we've got art, so this will be accompanied by art. This will not be sort of Q&A, random live stream. This will be topical, on the outline. I'm embarrassed to tell you how many pages of notes. I'll be reading a fair amount of stuff from Fire and Blood and stuff like that. And yes, Warriors in 4, smell the blood. We'll see later today. Big Warriors game. So from San Francisco Bay to Blackwater Bay, let's talk House Targaryen, the golden blood of Old Valyria, if you will, and Northern California. All right, no, but seriously, on the left-hand side, you'll see that I'm talking about the notes in the bottom right-hand corner. There's 2 columns there. On the left, you'll see the timeline, and on the right, you'll see the theories we're going to discuss. Because it's not just history. This isn't just some dry history recapping. No. This is also all of my best theories about the Targaryens and the Valyrians. That's not bad, right? Let me just... Oh, there was a tiny little crack. Let me just close that up. Hold on. Bear with me here. Close the gap. There we go. All right. So, yes, like I said, we'll be going through the timeline from the first Dragon Lords and the founding of the Freehold all the way through the Doom to the founding of House Targaryen, and the theories that we'll discuss along the way. Some fun theories. Great Empire of the Dawn theory, Valyrian Shepherd theory, as I'm calling it, Valyrian Lemur theory. If you've heard that one, you know what that's about. If you haven't, prepare to be blown away by that. Dracomorph theory. Of course, I've got a long video about that one, so I'll sum that up on the quicker side. Secrets of Valyrian Steel, that's a small one. Doom was an inside job, that's a big one. And Targaryen glass candle theory, I'll explain that. Dornish letter theory, for those of you who like that little mystery. And I might even get to Valena Valerion theory. I might run out of time. That's in the Vagar video if I don't get to it. So, by the way, shout out to Albert Chessa, joined to Squishers today. Thank you very much, Albert. Sent a PayPal in yesterday, too. So what's up, brother? I might go on his Mars Volta podcast and talk some Mars Volta, because I'm a huge Mars Volta fan. And, yeah, so follow me on social media, and I'll share the link to that whenever that happens. Yeah, I'm at the Dragon LML on Twitter, and I am David Lightbringer on Instagram. That's where you can find me. And Albert has a million podcasts, so I'm not even sure which link to drop. But like I said, follow me, and then when I go on the pod, I will share the link, and then you'll be able to find the rest of his stuff. So there we go. So let's talk House Targaryen, guys. Like I said, first Dragon Lords. That's where it starts. Oh, the lemur stuff is good. You're going to like the lemur stuff. Don't worry. Don't you worry. So the first Dragon Lords, as you can see on the screen here, on the left is Dragon Lords by Magali Villanueva, and on the right, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya by Amok. As that's my favorite Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya picture. The way Aegon's like holding Rhaenys around the back, and then Visenya, the way she's holding the sword, just the posture. It's great stuff. So I've got my very favorite Targaryen and Valyrian art coming. Trugon will make an appearance. Trugon, aka Fagon. My name is Fagon. Of course, he had a cameo in my last video as well. 3 hottest siblings in literature. Yeah, probably. That's why they had to screw each other, I guess. We'll get to that as well. We'll get to all that. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you do have super chats... Oh, I got another Squisher member. Who's this? O'Reilly. O'Reilly. Sorry, I don't know if you have O'Reilly's Auto Parts in your neck of the woods, but we do out here. And they've got the really catchy jingle that's been on the TV for like 20 years. Sorry, I had to sing it. Pavlovian trained. Yeah. Auto Parts. Thank you. Yeah, I got to finish the jingle. Thanks. So, friends, it was on the Great Peninsula, across from Slaver's Bay, that those who brought an end to the empire of Old Geese, though not to all of their ways, originated. Sheltered there, amidst the great volcanic mountains known as the 14 Flames, were the Valyrians, who learned to tame dragons and make them the most fearsome weapon of war the world ever saw. The tales the Valyrians told of themselves claimed they were descended from dragons and were kin to the ones they now controlled. In such fragments of Barth's unnatural history as remain, the Septon appears to have considered various legends examining the origins of dragons. This is a well-known passage, of course, and how they came to be controlled by the Valyrians. They were given a variety of options. Perhaps the Valyrians themselves, they claim that the dragons sprang forth as the children of the 14 Flames, meaning that they just lived around the volcanoes. You know, there's some question about whether dragons were genetically engineered, or whether or not they are, you know, native magical. They're obviously magical, but they could still be, you know, natural magical animals of Westeros, or Planetos, if you will. Planetos does seem to have magical animals like the unicorns and other things that the children name. And we know that the fireworms are from the 14 Flames as well. So it could be that the dragons are there too. So, next proposed option. Let's see. In Karth, the tales state that there was once a second moon in the sky, and of course, the whole second moon thing, this is about the long night and the moon meteors. Dragons don't actually come from the moon, but flaming meteors coming from a cracked moon would look like dragons in the sky. That's the whole point. Check out the Lightbringer series if you've never heard me talk about that, but I'm not going to go into the second moon legend. That doesn't have anything to do with Valyria, really. But it says then, in Ashai, the tales are many and confused, but certain texts, all impossibly ancient, claim that dragons first came from the shadow, a place where all our learning fails us. These Ashai histories say that a people so ancient they had no name first tamed dragons in the shadow and brought them to Valyria, teaching the Valyrians their arts before departing from the annals. Yet if men in the shadow had tamed dragons first, why did they not conquer as the Valyrians did? And this is Great Empire of the Dawn theory. This is where this comes in, of course. So they did conquer. This is the thing. So in Yiddish history, we're told about something called the Great Empire of the Dawn. It's an Atlantis-like pre-Long Night civilization. It's remembered in Yiddish legend because it occupied the same area as Yiti. However, it is like a forerunner to Yiti. Yiti tries to sort of claim the mantle of the Great Empire of the Dawn, but the Great Empire of the Dawn's territory encompassed much more than current Yiti. So I've got a map for that. You'll be happy to know. So the Great Empire of the Dawn, its borders are described as this: the Shivering Sea on the north, the Jade Sea in the south, the Bones Mountains in the west, and the Grey Waste, shout out to Grey Waste Tim, in the east. So this leaves it ambiguous. I've shaded those 4 areas so that it left in the middle the highlighted part, right where it says Great Empire of the Dawn. So it's basically all of the inhabitable land of far eastern Essos, east of the Bones. Now, I've argued that Ashai, on the tip of this peninsula, would be in the lands of the Great Empire of the Dawn. And we've got lots of stories about dragons coming from Ashai. Of course, Dany's eggs might come from Ashai, and even if Valyria is lying, it's a believable lie. It's a place where people think dragon eggs might come from. Bran sees a vision of dragons stirring beneath the sunrise. Dany hears that dragons still might be alive in a shy. There's dragon glass in a shy, etc., etc., etc. Hey, Grey Waste Tim, how's it going? So, basically, the thing about a shy is it's the largest city ever built. It's big enough to contain, like, Oldtown and King's Landing and Pentos all together. So it's this gargantuan city, but it's all built out of oily black stone, so it's super creepy and Lovecraftian, blah, 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 blah. But if you stop being freaked out and actually think about it, you can get some pretty obvious... yeah, and if you're having any buffering, just hit the refresh. Make sure you're set to 1080. Should be good. Should be good going out. But in any case, it's this huge city, and now it's all haunted by the shadow of a shy. So I've speculated that, you know, you wouldn't build a huge city out of oily black stone. I mean, maybe the Squishers built it millions of years ago, but if humans built it, they would have built it out of normal stone. You don't need, like, now there's only a few old magicians living in a shy. It's depopulated. It's like 1/10 of what it can actually hold lives there. So now it's just a dark sorcerer camp. And the stone is all oily. But I would speculate that oily stone has been transformed, just as the whole peninsula has clearly been transformed and corrupted. I think it goes back to the Long Night and the Moon Meteors. Check out the Lightbringer series. And by the way, Carsnark, I've got Minty obviously taken all of my super chats and stuff. I'm going to throw out a lot of video links today, Carsnark. So if you would do me the favor of pulling open my YouTube page with the video tab and just be quick on the search, and you could throw them in the chat. I know you do that anyway half the time, but yeah, just heads up. So Great Empire of the Dawn. There's one in the Great Empire of the Dawn playlist. Actually, if you could just share the whole playlist, Mr. Karshnerk. There's one called Metropolis, where I talk about the sort of, you know, civilization, archaeology, anthropology angle of all of this. But essentially, if Asshai was this big city in the Dawn Age, before the disaster that corrupted the Shadowlands happened, it would have been a glorious city. Not oily black stone and shadowed, but made out of regular stone or white marble or something more pleasant, right? And the size is the main thing. Big cities like that don't just happen. You need a large population to necessitate building a large city. And really that means a whole population that's going to go out into the hinterlands, down that whole peninsula. Again, it's blighted now, but it probably didn't used to be back in the day. And we know there's gold and gems and all kinds of things in the hills. So it's a place where if it wasn't all toxic, it'd be a very prosperous place to have a civilization. You can see it's also on the tip of a peninsula, so it can control the trade route there, the straits. It's called the Saffron Straits. Saffron is the most valuable spice in Planetos. That's said specifically. It's more valuable than gold. So those straits could be called the Saffron Straits because the sun rises and it looks golden like saffron. It has nothing to do with the saffron trade, but more likely it's called that because saffron goes through there. Just like the Jade Sea is called the Jade Sea because jade is an important metal to all of, or not metal, but a stone in the culture of all the people that live there. It does. You can get lots of jade there. The Great Empire of the Dawn and Yi both use jade. So there you have it. So point is, we've got this Great Empire of the Dawn civilization in Yitish history. It's huge. It sounds like Atlantis. It lasted for thousands of years, blah, 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 blah. And then, right, you know, it fell apart in the Long Night. It's tied to the Long Night disaster. And so separately, we've got this question of, oh, well, if dragons were in Asshai and if people tamed them there, why didn't they make a great empire? But then we've also got this great empire in history that's not attached to Asshai, but it's right next door. So I put them together. Yeah, saffron is still pretty expensive. So yeah, I mean, George didn't just make that up. It's always been a valuable spice, but its value is extremely high. It's specifically said in it's in the Elaine Winds of Wind chapter actually, because Harry the Heir's girlfriend, her name is Saffron, and Sansa makes a joke about it. But in any case, that's neither here nor there. So what was I saying? So yes, Asshai, the dragon lords that that created Asshai have to be connected to the Great Empire of the Dawn, because it is exactly that kind of large civilization that would build a large city like Asshai. It's just that it's hard to say that now because it's all been blighted and corrupted. So check out the Great Empire of the Dawn videos for the whole detail on that. But the point is, these were the first Dragonlords. And some of the best evidence that this is all connected is the fact, this thing called the Five Forts. If you look right next to the E in Empire, the last E, you'll see the Five Forts guarding this little pass between the Bleeding Sea and, the Dry Deep, I believe? Yes, the Dry Deep. Those 5 forts are made out of fused stone. And here's a picture of them. This is by Enrique Murguia. Yeah, growing the beard out. It's going to get a little thicker, going back to the Viking beard. 5 forts made out of fused stone is the point. It's the same kind of stone that we talk about with Dragonstone, where it's made out of stone that's been melted by the dragons, shaped with sorcery by the Valyrian sorcerers, and whipped into these fanciful shapes. We see it in Dragonstone. We see it in Old Valyria on the right there. That's Ted Nasmith, Valyria. And we see it in 2 other places besides all the... See, the Valyrians, basically, they built with fused stone everywhere. The Valyrian roads are made out of fused stone. All of the Valyrian cities are made out of fused stone. Dragonstone, and like some other cities that they created, like Volantis has the black walls. Those are made out of fused stone. Fused stone could only be made with dragons. That's the important thing. You have to have dragons to melt the stone to a molten state. And then, more importantly, you need sorcery to shape molten stone. You can't touch molten stone. You can't do it with tongs either. So it's pure sorcery that causes the molten stone to rise up into the shape of walls or dragons and then harden into place. That's the sorcery. So anywhere we see fused stone, we can be sure that Dragonlords were there. It's a big Dragonlords were here sign. So the 5 forts... Yi Ti attributes them to the Great Empire of the Dawn. And that's a pretty reliable attribution, because if they were made by Yi Ti would claim them. But they were there before Yi Ti, so they're older than Yi Ti, and their history claims it was the Great Empire of the Dawn. Well, it was Dragonlords, that's for sure. So we can assume they were the Dragonlords from Asshai. What were they doing all the way up here building the 5 forts? Well, it's because Great Empire of the Dawn and Asshai is one and the same. That's the answer. And we'll get to all the weird blood magic. Don't worry, that's coming up next. So the other place we find it is in Oldtown, at the base of the high tower. It's not really well drawn here. I mean, this is great art by Ted Nasmith, obviously. But you can see there's a square fortress under the tower that's a little bit darker in color. That should be the fused stone fortress. So it should look black, and there shouldn't be the masonry lines in there. But that's okay. No one has really drawn a totally book-accurate version of the fused stone fortress. But the story is the relevant thing. Basically, when the first high towers showed up here, this fortress was already there, the square one, on top of this rock. This is called Battle Isle. It was the only thing there. There's even rumors that dragons were roosting on the fortress. But whatever the truth is, it's this fused stone fortress. Down into the rock are these catacombs, these tunnels that go down into the rock, almost like dragons or worms carved them. And dragons can bore into the rock just like worms. We've seen Viserion do that. So it's a big sign that Dragonlords were here. And the high towers built their tower on top of it. So we know it's definitely older than the towers. The oldest high tower was built on top of it. So this predates the first high towers. And the high towers are thought to have predated the first men, or at least descended from people who predated the first men. They talk about seafarers from the Summer Isles or Valyria or who knows where coming to there first, before the first men. That was the Great Empire of the Dawn. And essentially, I'm probably getting into too much detail. I need to wrap this up. If you go to the first two Great Empire of the Dawn videos, the first one is Dragon Lords of Ancient Ashai. The second one is called Westeros. And the title image looks like this picture that you're seeing here. In the top center is the Amethyst Empress. She was the last empress of the Great Empire of the Dawn. She almost certainly has the purple eyes, and I'll explain that in a second. But probably the Valyrian looks descend from the Amethyst Empress. So Dany, the Daynes, Jon Snow, that's Ashara Dayne, Darkstar, Gerald Dayne, Edric Dayne, Dany with the short hair, Jon. Most of these images are by Bella Burgholtz, by the way, and the Amethyst Empress is by Onyx. So these first Dragon Lords. This is where Valyria comes from. And Sept and Barth hints at it. So if we go back to this quote that I stopped reading, he says, "These Ashai histories say that a people so ancient they had no name first tamed dragons in the shadow and brought them to Valyria, teaching the Valyrians their arts before departing from the annals." So right there, Sept and Barth is suggesting to us that Valyria comes from Ashai and the Great Empire of the Dawn, in my opinion. And this is essentially true. And the proof is in Dany's dream. Her vision. It's her Wake the Dragon dream. And it's that one where she's hearing the chant of Wake the Dragon, and she has all these little vignettes, these little visions, one after another. The second to last one says, "Ghosts lined the hallway, dressed in the faded raiment of kings. In their hands were swords of pale fire. They had hair of silver and hair of gold and hair of platinum white, and their eyes were opal and amethyst, tourmaline and jade." So the hair, silver, gold, platinum white, that's Valyrian hair, and their eyes are like gemstones, and the four that are named are opal, amethyst, tourmaline, and jade. And they're chanting for Dany to wake the dragon. And Atlantis Morissette has drawn this exact vision, and in their hands are swords of pale fire. So here you can see the Gemstone Emperors, as they're called. Because here's the thing, the king list, the list of emperors for the Great Empire of the Dawn, they are named after gemstones. And the four that Dany saw are 4 out of the 8. So the emperors and empresses of the Great Empire of the Dawn, the Pearl Emperor, the Jade Emperor, the Tourmaline Emperor, the Onyx Emperor, Topaz, Opal, the Amethyst Empress, and the Bloodstone Emperor. That's 8. Now, those could be dynasties. It's more likely that they're dynasties instead of individual emperors. That most people think that. It's just sort of a mythicized history, if you will. But the point is that when Dany sees the vision, one of them has eyes of amethyst. They all have Valyrian hair, but one has amethyst eyes. And so this one would match the Valyrians. And so this lines up. So it makes you think, okay, when we first read this passage, most people thought, well, these are Dany's Valyrian ancestors. They obviously sound like Valyrians. They have swords of flaming swords. It doesn't take a lot of brains to connect Lightbringer and Azor Ahai to Valyrian magic and their magic swords, which are probably made with blood magic, just like Lightbringer is, and we'll get to that. So people have always thought, okay, well, these are the Valyrian ancestors that Dany sees in her vision. But once he wrote The World of Ice and Fire and fleshed out these ancient Ashai dragon lords that I think he always had in his mind, because in Game of Thrones, there's tons of references, dragons and Ashai. There's many, many links, like I mentioned earlier. So he's always planned on dragons having originated from Ashai. When he finally got around to fleshing that out, that was The World of Ice and Fire. He created the Great Empire of the Dawn legend. He just took those 4 gemstones that Dany saw in the eyes of these, kingly ghosts, and he used those to name the emperors of the Great Empire of the Dawn so that we would know to connect them. So Dany essentially is seeing the ghosts of the original dragon lords from Ashai in this vision. And that makes sense that they would be telling her, wake the dragon. They're trying to connect her to this old secret knowledge. That's more or less what's going on. So it's a pretty awesome scene once you realize what's actually happening there. And this also confirms that the Great Empire of the Dawn were dragon lords. Just to sort of knit that together, if these people have Valyrian hair and fire swords and they're telling Dany to wake the dragon, these are obviously dragon lords. But they're also obviously the emperors of the Great Empire of the Dawn. And as you can see, Atlantis Morissette has drawn them looking like they're from different ethnicities. And the reason is the Great Empire of the Dawn would have been, step down, girl, a multi-ethnic empire. Give me some Cleo emojis, my squishers. If you look at this land, the Great Empire of the Dawn, after it broke up, many nations arose within this area. Yi Ti, of course, the whatever current population of Ashai is, but more importantly, the Jogos Nai, the Kingdom of Herkun, the Kingdom of Nefer. All of those people arose in this land that used to be the Great Empire of the Dawn, and probably many more. Lang was also a part of the Great Empire of the Dawn. Under the W in Dawn is the Isle of Lang. Shout out to Killer P. Phenomenon 1. Got a whole new style called Lang. All right, y'all don't know what I'm talking about. Never mind. So there's the Langi. There's the Isle of Lang. This was part of the Great Empire of the Dawn too. So after the Great Empire of the Dawn broke up, there would have been essentially all these different peoples that were united in the empire would have formed their own kingdoms. And that tells you that the Great Empire of the Dawn itself was a multi-ethnic empire. There's no way you can rule this much area and have it not be made up of different tribes and ethnicities and stuff. So, Great Empire of the Dawn, these dragon lords probably would have looked all different. Obviously, one of them is the Tourmaline Emperor with the black coat there. He looks Asian, and that makes sense because obviously Yi Ti is a sort of pseudo-Asian culture, Asian-inspired fantasy culture. So obviously some of the Great Empire of the Dawn people should be Asian. But yeah, so there you go. And this also ties into the running conversation that we've been having about Valyria. Valyria seems to descend from whatever dynasty, if you will, that has the purple eyes and the silver hair. But the idea that it could have had more than one type of looking people, more than one ethnicity, also makes sense because the place they came from would have been like that as well. Hey, girl. Come here, girl. Also, I found a passage that the Valyrians prized the rare animals of the Summer Isles as pets, meaning parrots. So, Summer Islander parrots, or parrots from the Summer Isles, were kept in Valyria as pets. So, that's confirmed cultural links from Valyria to the Summer Isles, just as a follow-up. So moving on, these are the first Dragon Lords. They came to Westeros. This is the important thing, is that they came to Westeros and they built this fortress at Battle Isle. And there's a lot more to it, but they probably also founded House Dayne. Because remember, House Dayne, they have Valyrian looks too. Even though George has clarified they're not related to the House Targaryen, many members of House Dayne have silver hair. So on the left-hand side here is Darkstar. His hair is like a silver glacier with a streak of midnight black. And Arianne even says he looks like, if I had a kid with him, they'd look like Dragon Lords. Ashara Dayne has purple eyes. Edric Dayne has blue eyes that look purple in certain lights. They look just like Fagon's eyes, by the way. And his hair is ash-colored, which is kind of metallic looking. So it's like a faded version of silver hair. And then on the far right is Gerald Dayne. Nobody knows what he looks like. He has no description. But point is, we've seen at least 3 Daynes with Valyrian looks. And yes, there used to be dragons all over the world. So that does kind of indicate that they were probably wild. Either that or they got out of control of the Great Empire of the Dawn and flew everywhere. But most likely they were wild like millions of years ago. You know, thousands and thousands of years. Let's see. I have that quote lined up. So the Great Empire of the Dawn left their mark in Westeros with House Dayne, House Hightower, a few other things. The main thing is dawn and the long night. Like, that's the point of all this. Like, Jon and Dany have to reawaken the Targaryen dragons and use them to fight the others. That's why Dany birthed the dragons again. That's why House of the Dragon is important. House of the Dragon is the dying of the Targaryen dragons. So Dany, the Targaryens were supposed to have dragons to fight the White Walkers, but the Maesters killed them in all likelihood. Oh, thanks, Will. He's just saying he noticed the Azor Ahai long night symbolism of Sir Hugh of the Vale. Yeah, that's a good scene. That's a great one. Right on, Will. So the point of the Great Empire of the Dawn theory and George laying all this down is he wants us to know the Dragon Lords came to Westeros during the Long Night, and they had something to do with the Long Night affairs. The last hero had dragon steel. The Danes have this weird magic sword that's like Valyrian steel, but different. These things obviously have something to do with the original events of the Long Night. And essentially what I'm telling you is that Dragon Lords from Ashai had some sort of contact with Westeros, probably to learn magic from the children or something like that. And this was tied into the events of the original Long Night. So when Jon and Dany, the last scions of Valyria, if you will, are returning with dragons to the north to fight the others, this is an echoing of what happened the first time. So check out the Great Empire of the Dawn series for the whole detail on that. But that is essentially, these are the first Dragon Lords. This is where Valyria comes from, and this is the beginning of this is the beginning of the loop that Jon and Dany are closing, essentially. Ashai is tied to the Long Night. It's obviously, blighted by the Long Night. And the legend of the Great Empire of the Dawn essentially ends with the Bloodstone Emperor usurping and killing his sister, the Amethyst Empress, and committing other acts of evil that caused the Long Night. So then Azor Ahai comes along. Azor Ahai, that story obviously also from Ashai. So we've always known that the Long Night and Azor Ahai and all that stuff is tied to Ashai. So this is sort of, the Great Empire of the Dawn theory sticks all these things together. And it shows you how these dragons from Ashai, these events from Ashai, 10,000 years ago, are tied into Westeros and the Long Night there. So it's important because, like I said, this is the loop that the Targaryens are essentially closing. Cool. So that took too long. So here's a cool thing for you. And here's just a little bit of art, by the way. This is from Martin H. Mathis. These are labeled the Five Forts, but essentially this is the Great Empire of the Dawn city building that you can enjoy. It's perfectly calibrated. It looks kind of Asian inspired, which makes sense. And let's just check out these PayPals that are coming in here while we go through this. Here's a wider shot of the same city, if you will. Cool. I'll come to this in a second, Jenny. Thank you. And then here's the third one. This is actually, yeah, there's more than that. So this is like a further away shot, a different Five Fort, it looks like. Still the same artist, Martin Mathis, and this is all from the Unseen Westeros exhibit. So here you can see these fortresses. You have to imagine them made out of, again, the fused stone. Very cool looking. And if we go on, Unseen Westeros also has Yi Ti art. And these ones are by, let me see the name. Henrik Zaringer. And he's got 3. So this is Yi Ti Jungle, Yi Ti in the Hills, and this is the best one, Yi Ti Gate. So this would be downtown Yi Ti. So this is all really coordinated art here. So you can see Great Empire of the Dawn, Yi Ti. It's all fairly contiguous. It's just more magical looking back in the day. And Yi Ti looks more like super awesome fantasy China. Very cool. Very, very cool. So here's a cool link to Damon and Rhaenyra. Okay, so Damon and Rhaenyra are apparently an echo of the Bloodstone Emperor and the Amethyst Empress in a really interesting way. Actually, not the Amethyst Empress. Well, sort of. Let me explain. The Bloodstone Emperor, first he kills his sister, the Amethyst Empress. But since Dragon Lords marry each other, it's possible that he was even married to his sister, the Amethyst Empress. And actually, I think it's the same story as Azor Ahai killing his wife, Nissa Nissa. So I think Amethyst Empress and Nissa Nissa might be the same person. And that's all the same story. Or just a mutated version of the same story. But then Bloodstone Emperor, he takes a tiger woman for his bride after he overthrows and usurps. And Tiger Woman is kind of a mystery. No one knows what that means. But of course, if you go to Lang is called the Land of 10,000 Tigers. And it's ruled by a god empress. So who should the rulers of the Great Empire of the Dawn are called god emperors. So who should the god emperor marry? Well, maybe the god empress. So maybe Bloodstone Emperor marrying a tiger woman is a reference to marrying an empress from Lang. It's the most logical guess. I mean, that's the Land of 10,000 Tigers, and she's the god empress. And Lang was part of the Great Empire of the Dawn, right? So Damon, he's a Bloodstone Emperor echo because when he sets himself up as King of the Narrow Sea, he takes for his seat the largest island in the Stepstones, which is called Bloodstone. So he's the king of Bloodstone Island, or the Bloodstone King, or the Bloodstone Emperor. And of course, he's also a dragon lord. He rides Caraxes, the red dragon. Then he gives Rhaenyra a jade tiara, once said to have belonged to the Empress of Lang. So, which is a total weird throwaway random line in Fire and Blood. And you're like, a Langi Empress tiara, what's that? But it effectively renders Rhaenyra, who of course has Valyrian looks and thus matches the look of the Amethyst Empress, and like all Valyrians and Targaryens are probably descended from the Amethyst Empress. She now is wearing the jade tiara of an Empress of Lang. So this might be some sort of clue that Amethyst Empress, God Empress of Lang, they're somehow connected. Either they're the same person, or emperors from the Great Empire of the Dawn potentially marry the Empresses of Lang. There's some sort of link there. So I think that's cool that Damon and Rhaenyra have this interesting echo of Bloodstone Emperor and a Tiger Woman, the Empress of Lang, but also Amethyst Empress because she's got the amethyst eyes. She's also, of course, Rhaenyra, very sad, eaten by a dragon at the end. So that could be similar to like a blood magic, Nissa Nissa kind of death. Rhaenyra's forced into marriage. Potentially, that could be an echo as well. Of course, lots of people are. So, there we go. Moving along. Valyrian Shepherd Theory. Okay, this is fun. Talked about this a little bit with Nettles on the Sheep Stealer live stream. Oh, and let me give you some art too. This is another Langi art. This is Lang by Drafturgy. They have, so you can see the tiger there. They have huge apes on Lang that are supposedly almost as smart as men. So potentially some evolution happening going on there. But yes, Valyrian Shepherd Theory. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got Damon and Rhaenyra art too. Of course, I used this on the Meet the Dragons video. This is by Draw Souls. Damon and Rhaenyra, Caraxes, and Syrax. Hey, girl Nettles. You're just in time for the sheep stealer action. Here is some awesome Damon and Rhaenyra art. So on the right is by Chili Raven art. Canonically accurate, slightly heavy-set Rhaenyra. Appreciate that. And on the left is Naomi Makes Art. Naomi Botello. Damon and Rhaenyra. And so I can't tell if either one of those are meant to be the tiara, but the one on the left does have green stones in it, whereas the one on the right has multicolored stones. So not sure. But I would picture the jade tiara also having other stones. So yeah, Rhaenyra's just like a little thick. Yeah, thick representation. Some people are a little upset that the older actress for Rhaenyra is not heavy set, but that's okay. We can riot about small changes later. So, of course, I guess we haven't seen too much footage of her. Maybe they'll sort of make her look a little bit heavy set later on, because they're having the actresses play or all the actors play people at different ages. But in any case, there's your canonically accurate thick Rhaenyra. So, and Chili Raven art, of course, does awesome Targ art. Lots of Targaryen art. So Valyrian shepherd theory goes like this. And it goes a little something like this. I think the Valyrians were originally shepherds. That's the long and short of it. Krasna's Monaclaws makes a remark about old Gis ruling an empire when the Valyrians were still F-word sheep, which is an insult you would throw at somebody whose ancestors were shepherds, right? And you can see in the HBO artwork, which is what you're seeing here, this is the HBO art from the it's one of their history and lore series. And they've drawn them as shepherds. You can see the guy's got a shepherd's crook and there's some sheep over there. So it's not said. I thought it was actually said somewhere that they were shepherds, but it's not said anywhere. So I guess we're supposed to deduce that they were shepherds from this insult from Krasna's. I also noticed, though, that the Lazarene, who aren't far away, and let me find my map. Sorry, that's the wrong one. So you see where it says the grasslands, and you see marine there. If you keep going along that river, the Skahazadon, you come to the lands of the Lazarene, who worship the great shepherd. So it's potentially an older cultural belief from this area. You could imagine perhaps the Valyrians first started in these painted mountains, because usually shepherds tend flocks in the foothills as opposed to just the plains. So essentially the first Valyrians seem to have been shepherds of some kind. And the reason why this is cool is because of Nettles and Sheepstealer. In Fire and Blood, of course, there's a wild dragon on Dragonstone named Sheepstealer. And Sheepstealer, as you can guess, if you don't know, doesn't mind stealing sheep. I don't mind stealing sheep. Got a Temple of the Dog cover in the works. In any case, this is by Paolo Pugioni. And Sheepstealer likes to steal sheep. So Nettles, seen here. Oh, let me zoom out. There's Nettles. Nettles is maybe a dragon seed, maybe. She doesn't look like it, though, so nobody believes her. But that doesn't mean anything, really. She could just have distant Targaryen genetics that were overridden. But she is a brown girl with dark hair and dark eyes, as we discussed last week with my special guest, Nettles, who cosplays Nettles, the girl Nettles. And so Nettles is able to tame Sheepstealer with sheep. Sheepstealer actually kills more people than any of the other dragons that people try to mount. More than Grey Ghost, more than... I forget the other one. No one tames Cannibal. But, yeah, also Silverwing and... Well, whatever. Point is, Sheepstealer's kills the most people, even though Sheepstealer's not the biggest dragon. But Nettles is able to tame Sheepstealer. That's right. Not going hungry. Thank you, Carl Karsnark. I know you'd get it. I've got lyrics, man. I've got lyrics. So... able to tame the dragon with sheep. And it's just standard way you tame any animal. You bring it food, and then it becomes your friend and it trusts you. And then you climb on its back, and then you're riding the dragon. Simple as that. Right, Cleo? Makes perfect sense. So the interesting thing here is that Nettles may be a dragon seed, or she may not be. We just don't know. There's no way to know. George leaves it intentionally vague. But she's able to tame the dragon with the sheep. So, was it all the sheep? Was it the fact that she had a dragon bond that enabled her to bond with the dragon? Because the dragon bond is magical. So even if like a normal person is able to make friends with the dragon, I'm not sure that they'd be able to quote unquote bond with the dragon. And it seems like you need to bond with the dragon in order to ride the dragon. This is all extrapolation. We're not quite sure, but that's what it seems like. So what I would think is that she is a dragon seed, and she did bond with Sheepstealer, but that she used the sheep to get close without getting eaten. Because just because you have the blood of the dragon doesn't mean you won't get eaten. Quentin got eaten. Lots of people got burned and eaten trying to ride these dragons. So the dragon is not a slave. It has free will, of course. So what I think happened is that it's a combination of both. She also sang to the dragon, Girl Nettles says. Yeah, so a little singing, little sheep, and then the dragon bond to make the magical dragon riding thing happen. This is what I think happened. And the point of George creating this story, other than it just being a cool little story, is probably to give us a clue about how the first Valyrians might have tamed dragons. Okay? Now, they come from the Great Empire of the Dawn. The Great Empire of the Dawn almost certainly were the first people to do the blood magic experiments that led to the blood of the dragon. Okay, probably not Valyria. It would have been Great Empire of the Dawn. Valyria would have been the Valyrians rather, would have been one people from the Great Empire of the Dawn. And if the Valyrians were genetically engineered, which they seem to have been, it would have happened in a shy. But at some point, these people in Valyria, they might have lost, they might not have had the ability to control the dragons as well as the Ashai people did. Maybe this is before they had Dragonbinder horns. Because see, Dany says that the Valyrians used sorceress horns and binding spells to control the dragons as well. So it's not just the dragon bond. Because again, just having the blood of the dragon doesn't protect you from getting eaten if the dragon doesn't like how you smell or whatever. So you can use something like a dragon horn to pacify the dragon so you can climb on its back. Or you can use sheep. So essentially, I think that what we should imagine is the first Valyrians using sheep to bond with whatever dragons were left over from the Great Empire of the Dawn. I mean, it could be that the Valyrians, for example, fled the Great Empire during the Long Night when it was collapsing, and they sailed to this new peninsula. They set up shop there. The dragons were already there, because we know the dragons spread throughout the entire world. So even if the Great Empire of the Dawn tamed them, or even manipulated them, or created them through magic, we know that at some point they became wild. So the Valyrians may have fled the Great Empire without dragons, landed on this volcanic peninsula, found the dragons there, and reconnected with them. Anything like that is possible. And what this means is that this Sheepstealer story is almost certainly some part of the equation. So the Valyrians were shepherds. They probably used sheep to tame the dragons, just like Nettles did. And I think it's very funny that, to get back to Damon again, Damon is, of course, married to a woman of House Royce, of Runestone, who has armor with runes on it, bronze armor with runes and things like that, magical runes. And Damon says he doesn't like his wife, his Royce wife. He says, in the Vale, the men fuck sheep. You cannot fault them. The sheep are prettier than their women. So here we have, over in Meereen, we have a Meereenese slaver insulting Dany, saying your ancestors sleep with sheep. And then here's Damon saying, oh, the people in the Vale, they sleep with sheep. It's like, bro, you're descended from people who, might have been closer to their sheep than you might think, buddy. But it's just kind of funny. Also, if you think about the Vale, it's a dormant volcano, almost certainly, that they're living on. So it's actually pretty comparable to Valyria. It's shepherds living on a volcano. Yeah. And Cat even compares the Eyrie to the topless towers of Valyria, for that matter. Okay, it's time for some funky music. I'll be back in 60 seconds. And we're back. All right. Funky music. Yes, making a new pot of tea. So I'll just have to go grab the water in 1 second. So that is the Valyrian shepherd theory. Now it's time for Valyrian lemur theory, and this is even weirder. And by the way, let me give you the artists on this. On the left is Nettles and Sheep Stealer by Olivier Calou, Calou, and on the right is Sheep Stealer and Nettles by Six Rosenrot, and that's on Tumblr. And this one, of course, is by Of Evenfall Hall. Very cool. So lemurs, cuddly little things. Hey, Atlantis Morissette. I was showing off your artwork a bit earlier, in case you weren't here. But you know I won't ever talk about the Great Empire of the Dawn without showing off your amazing artwork, which Atlantis made by request. I told her, she loves drawing magical stuff. And she's like, man, you got any ideas? And I was like, no one has ever drawn Dany's vision of the Gemstone Empress, please. And she came up with this. So yeah, just showing that off again. Super cool. So, lemurs. This is a Game of Thrones, Dany. They crossed the rolling hills of Norvos, past terraced farms and small villages, where the townsfolk watched anxiously from atop white stucco walls. Forded some rivers, camped beside a waterfall, skirted the tumbled ruins of a vast dead city where ghosts were said to moan among blackened marble columns. They raced down Valyrian roads 1,000 years old, and straight as a Dothraki arrow, because fused stone is damn near indestructible. Close, but not quite. For half a moon, they rode through the forest of Qohor, where the leaves made a golden canopy high above them, and the trunks of the trees were as wide as city gates. There were great elk in that wood, and spotted tigers, and lemurs with silver fur and huge purple eyes. But all fled before the approach of the Khalasar, and Dany got no glimpse of them. So basically, they're telling her that the lemurs live in the forest there. And then it's not until the World of Ice and Fire that we get our lemurs bred for dragon food, like white mice for pet snakes. I don't think so. That's not where I'm going with this. So in the World of Ice and Fire, we get a little more on these lemurs. And it says the forest of Qohor also yields up furs and pelts of all kinds, many rare and fine and highly prized, as well as silver, tin, and amber. The vast forest has never been fully explored, according to the maps and scrolls at the Citadel, and it likely conceals many mysteries and wonders. It contains elk and deer, wolves, tree cats, boars, spotted bears, and even a species of lemur, a creature known from the Summer Isles and Sithorios, but otherwise rarely seen farther north. These lemurs are said to have silver-white fur and purple eyes, and are sometimes called little Valyrians. So these are the lemurs that Dany's talking about. Now, I could not find any actual lemurs with purple eyes, but many of them are silver, as you've noticed. That is pretty common, silver and white fur. And they do have big eyes. So here's the thing about lemurs. Oh, yes. And by the way, there's a preserved example of a lemur in the Citadel, although so many hands have patted it for luck in their examinations that its fur has long since fallen out. Yeah, either that or the maesters are trying really hard to figure out how the Targaryens are wired. And so they've been inspecting this lemur to death, wearing it out, trying to discover the secret. So the lemurs, check this out. The word lemur is Latin. And it comes from lemures, and a lemures, a lemures. I don't know how the Latin pronunciation would be, but they are specters or ghosts that were exorcised during the Lemuria festival, and that's of course the lost land of Lemuria takes its name from this as well. So the Lemuria festival was a feast in the religion of ancient Rome, during which the Romans performed rites to exorcise the malevolent and fearful ghosts of the dead from their home. And the origin of the myth goes all the way back to Ovid, who says that Lemuria comes from Remuria, and that it had been instituted by Romulus to appease the spirit of Remus, his brother, whom he killed. So, of course, Valyria, very comparable to Rome. So the founding myth of Rome, Romulus slays his brother Remus, that's Proto-Indo-European twin slayer mythology. And then we've got this festival to honor the dead spirit called Lemuria. They propitiate it by offering it food and then also tell it to go away. So it's part banishment and part propitiation. They actually throw beans over their shoulder, if you're curious. Point is, these lemurs, these are ghosts, and they are the ghosts of their kin in particular, if you look at the Romulus and Remus story. Now, lemurs, the animal, were named lemur, and the first ones were actually slender lorises. They're slow and nocturnal. Almost all lemurs are nocturnal. And so the person who coined the term and named them lemurs, he was thinking of these ghosts that are active at night. And some people also think maybe the large glowing eyes had something to do with it. But specifically, it was the idea that the slender lories are slow and nocturnal. So they move kind of ghostly, and they come out at night. Okay? They got glowing eyes. So the thing is that some people thought that the lemur was named after the folklore of Madagascar, which is where lemurs evolved from. And you can find them in India also, but they're almost all found on Madagascar. And the Malagasy people of Madagascar have legends that lemurs are the souls of their ancestors. Come here. So lemurs are named after ghosts, and the local folklore of Madagascar connects them to the ancestral ghosts. Okay? It's pretty clear and strong association with the lemurs. So we've got Valyrian lemurs in the forest of Qohor. And if you go back to the first quote, it says Dany passed through a city with ghosts right before the lemurs. It says, a vast dead city where ghosts were said to moan among blackened marble columns. Oh yes, the lemurs also have really weird ghostly cries. That's part of it too. So Dany passes through a city with lots of moaning ghosts, and then they talk about the lemurs. So what's the point of all this? Well, think about what George is telling us. George is telling us that Valyrian ghosts are inside of animals. That's what it means. The lemurs are ghosts, and they look like Valyrians, and they're animals. So, the ghosts of the Valyrians' ancestors are inside of animals too, but not lemurs. They're inside of the dragons. That's where they are. So, now we go back to the statement where they say, the tales the Valyrians told of themselves claimed they were descended from dragons and were kin to the ones they now controlled. So here's the theory. The theory is that to create the dragon bond, a dragon lord must first be sacrificed, probably using skin changer magic, but maybe some other kind of magic. The spirit of the sacrificed dragon lord must go into the dragon somehow. Then the descendants of that sacrificed dragon lord are kin to the dragon because their ancestor is in the dragon. So then this familial line can now bond with that line of dragons. And that is what we see in Valyria. Because they practice, the incest that the Valyrians practiced is in the family. Think about it. If all the Valyrians look the same, then it should be fine for Valyrians to marry other Valyrians of any house, but they don't. They practiced familial incest. Why do they do that? Hat tip to Minty Maelstrom for this brainwave. The reason why is because the dragons are connected to the family line, not just Valyrian blood, the family line. And so, for example, you have the ancestor of all Targaryens went into the first Targaryen dragon. Now, all the children of subsequent Targaryens can bond with all of the dragons born from that first dragon. So, with House Targaryen, all of their dragons that they went to Dragonstone, they brought 5 dragons from Old Valyria. There's only Balerion lives. And then we've got these other 2, Meraxes and Vhagar. So all the Targaryen dragons are descended from Meraxes and Vhagar. Balerion's not a female dragon. Vhagar is. We don't know if Meraxes is or not. But basically, that's where they would come from. Oh, Minty, don't be impatient with me. I'm getting there. Jeez. I'm getting there. So, this if the Dragon Link is contained by the family line, then this would explain also the way that the Targaryens act. Okay? So, the Targaryens, if they marry into other houses, then they are opening up the possibility that other houses can bond with their dragons. So they do it sometimes. Like, for example, they marry into House Arryn. Emma Arryn, the wife of Viserys, she's half Targaryen. So once the Targaryens marry into another family, they seem to adopt them into the Targaryen sphere and then keep remarrying with them to sort of keep control of them. And you could even argue, hey, I don't appreciate that. I don't know how to change names. You could even argue that they made a mistake by marrying into other families at all. Because think about what happened with the Dance of the Dragons. You've got Valyrian dragon riders, Targaryen dragon riders, and then Hightower dragon riders. And the Hightowers, Valyrians, and different factions of Targaryen all have different political motivations. And that's how we get a Targaryen civil war. So, keeping it in the family, it's not just about maintaining the bloodlines. It's also a political thing, because the bloodline is what possesses the dragon. And so it's also about maintaining the control of the dragons of your line. So the houses of Valyria would not have wanted to marry each other, because then there could be this dragon contamination. They could own each other's dragons and stuff like that. And we don't hear about a lot of dragon civil wars, like Valyrian civil wars. We don't hear about anything like that. They may have happened, but we don't hear about them. So, all of this incest and stuff, it's got a political angle as well as a magical angle. Is that closer to what you were saying, Minty? Sure, her part was the last part. I was just connecting it back, you see, to what was going on in Valyria, where we're told they practice that familial incest. Because again, if it's just about Valyrian blood, then any Valyrian would do. But that's not how they do it. Okay, let me go get my hot water so I can pour another glass of tea. And let me entertain you while I'm gone. Oh, I know what I'll give you. In case any of you have not watched the Maester Conspiracy video yet, shame on you if you haven't. There's a very funny skit at the beginning, which you shall watch now. All right, yes, thank you for coming in and talking to us, Nan. Is it Old Nan? Is that short for Nancy? Anyway, Nan, we really appreciate it. Now, if you could just tell us, according to the best of your recollection, which one of these individuals was responsible for the death of the Targaryen dragons?
Let me see. That's him right there on the left.
Aha, the Dragon Slayer, the gallant one, armed with a sword. I knew it. I knew it.
No, not the bloody Dragon Slayer. Him.
Ah, you mean the angry mob of peasants? Well, I suppose if there was enough of them, some of them do look pretty shady.
No, not the bloody peasants, you idiot.
All right, how about the dragon there on the right? Big, strong dragon. Seems like he might be able to kill some dragons.
It was him right there on the left.
What now, the Maester?
Yes, the damn Maester.
Oh, no, he's just there to keep an eye on the suspects.
He's the bloody suspect.
He's the suspect? No,
yes.
No, I'm sorry, you must be mistaken. Now, thank you for your time, Nan. If you'll just go ahead and proceed through that door on the left.
Take your filthy hands off of me.
We really have a lot of work to do here. Thank you
never?
for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maesters.
Hey there, friends. It's the Dragon LML. It was the Dragon LML, but you'll have to watch the video for the rest of that delightful presentation. But you can see where it's going with my funny little Monty Python-esque old Nan skit. Yes, we've got a squisher. Let's honor this. Who's this? Oh, Ontis Tube. Yes. You've moved up to Sexy Squisher at 4 months. Could it be possible that Sheepstealer or Cannibal were not Targaryen dragons, so the Targaryens did not have influence over them? Yes, I suppose that's true. And I guess I shouldn't say that all the Targaryen dragons have to be descended from Meraxes and Vhagar. There are wild dragons on Dragonstone. The Targaryens were there. Valyria established Dragonstone almost 200 years before the Targaryens arrived. So there could have been other dragons on Dragonstone that laid eggs. The wild dragons there could have been there already. We don't know. Now, it could have been that Aenar Targaryen's dragons were the first ones on Dragonstone, but it's not said. It's just said that Aenar went there with 5 dragons. That's it. And it's said that the Valyrians, well, we'll get to that. Anyways, thank you, Ontis Tube. There we go. Not all dragons are criminals. Oh, did I say Vhagar again? I'm trying to go back to Vhagar, but it's hard. I think I'd say it's probably about 50-50 right now. So that was cool. The lemur theory is cool. So just to follow up on this, there's a little bit more. Basically, these Valyrian lemurs are a big clue about thinking about Valyrian ghosts inside of animals. Like I said, dragons instead of lemurs. That is the clue. And by the way, this comes from Mithras Stoneborn from the Westeros.org forums. And I see him on Reddit once in a while, but I haven't talked to him in a long time. This was his theory. Now, this also ties into the Sphinx. So the Valyrian Sphinx has a dragon's body in the face of a person, as shown here. These are the Valyrian Sphinxes. There's 2 in the King's Landing throne room. They've got ruby eyes, I think they're made of black marble, maybe fused stone. I forget which. But the point is, they have a head of a person. The dragon is the body. Now, there's this passage where about Maester Aemon when he's dying in Braavos and he's having these visions and he's talking to Sam, and it says, he said the Sphinx was the riddle, not the Riddler, whatever that meant. He asked Sam to read for him from a book by Sept and Barth, whose writings had been burned during the reign of Baelor the Blessed. Once he woke up saying, "The dragon must have 3 heads," he wailed, "but I am too old and frail to be one of them. I should be with her." So, the dragon has 3 heads, and the Sphinx is the riddle, not the Riddler. Both of these sayings come right next to each other. So Mithras put this together, Mithras Stoneborn, and he said, well, if you look at the Valyrian Sphinx, the Valyrian Sphinx is the riddle. And the riddle is about how do the Targaryens control dragons. And the Sphinx is giving you the answer. So look at the Sphinx. It has the head of a person, the body of a dragon. That's essentially a depiction of a human spirit inside of a dragon. It's a dragon with a human head. So the head's in control of the dragon. It's inverted with Robb Stark. When he dies, the wolf head is put on his body. And when a skin changer dies, they go into their wolf, right? So he's been absorbed into the wolf. He's not in control. The wolf is in control. So when you see a human head on the dragon, this could imply that the people have to be in control, or that specifically there's a human spirit in the dragon. So when they say 3 heads has the dragon, not only does it refer to the 3 dragon riders, Dany and Jon and maybe Euron or whoever, it's also the 3 things that need to come together to make the dragon bond. The first head is the ancestor who is slain that goes into the dragon. The second head is the dragon itself, and the third head is the dragon rider. So 3 heads has the dragon. So that's that theory. That is the follow-up to the Valyrian lemur theory. And that brings us to Dracomorph theory. Now, Dracomorph theory, essentially what this is about, I think this tea is steeped. Let me pull my tea out here. This is, again, going to the question of how did the Valyrians come to have reptile DNA? Dinosaur DNA, as they say in Jurassic Park. How did this happen? Because the Targaryens have lizard babies. It's not just Dany's lizard baby. There's a bunch of them. Maegor's got one. Damon has one. Sometimes Targaryen babies come out with wings or tails or scales or other very obviously reptilian traits. So this tells you that there's actually lizard DNA. There's the blood of the dragon is in the Targaryens, like literally. There is some sort of heinous blood magic going on. When life gives you lemurs, make lemurnade. So, yeah, Rhaenyra has a lizard baby. It's Damon and Rhaenyra's baby. That's right. So in Sept and Barth's Dragons, Worms, and Wyverns, he speculated that the blood mages of Valyria used wyvern stock to create dragons. That's a fireworm. Here's a swamp wyvern. This one is by Kevin Catalan. And this one is by Pablo Dominguez. So, though the blood mages, he speculated that the blood mages of Valyria used wyvern stock to create dragons. And we could say that maybe this was in a shy, perhaps, if this happened. Though the blood mages were alleged to have experimented mightily with their unnatural arts, this claim is considered far-fetched by most maesters, among them Maester Vanyan's Against the Unnatural contains certain proofs of dragons having existed in Westeros even in the earliest of days, before Valyria rose to power. Now here's the thing, those certain proofs would obviously be skeletons, dragon skeletons that they would dig up here and there. But how would you know a wyvern skeleton from a dragon skeleton? Perhaps if it was really big, it would be a dragon, but we don't know if wyverns used to be bigger. And there are some really big wyverns in Sothorios. So then, here's the thing, all right? In Fire and Blood, it says, the Valyrians were more than dragon lords. They practiced blood magic and other dark arts as well, delving deep into the earth for secrets best left buried, and twisting the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras. So here's another rumor about human-animal hybrids, if you will. Then we hear about a place called Gogassos. Used to be called Gorgai. And by any name, it was an evil place. The Dragon Lords sent their worst criminals to the Isle of Tears to live out their lives in hard labor. Gogassos is on the Isle of Tears. So in the dungeons of Gogassos, torturers devised new torments. In the flesh pits, blood sorcery of the darkest sort was practiced, as beasts were mated to slave women to bring forth twisted half-human children. So, the point is, there's enough rumors around Valyria that they were combining humans and animals that we have to think there's some truth to it. And we also hear about eyeless men and winged men and things like that in either Sothorios or out in the Grey Waste. So it seems like there was some Island of Dr. Moreau action going on. Either in Ashai or in Valyria or both. Yeah, the Wyverns don't breathe fire. That's the only difference between a wyvern and a dragon, is that the Wyverns do not breathe fire. And here's the Wyvern. Quote, it says, most terrible of all were the Wyverns, those tyrants of the southern skies, with their great leathery wings, cruel beaks, and insatiable hunger. Close kin to dragons, Wyverns cannot breathe fire, but they exceed their cousins in ferocity, and are a match for them in all other respects, save size. So they are a bit smaller. Brindled wyverns, with their distinctive jade and white scales, grow up to 30 feet long. Swamp wyverns have been known to attain even greater size, though they are sluggish by nature and seldom fly far from their lairs. Brown bellies, no larger than monkeys, are even more dangerous than their larger kin, for they hunt in packs of 100 or more. Oh, Jesus, that sounds like a nightmare. But most dreadful of all is the Shadow Wing, a nocturnal monster whose black scales and wings make him all but invisible until he descends out of the darkness to tear apart his prey. So this is interesting because the black dragons are the biggest. So the black wyverns are the biggest, and the black dragons are the biggest. Balerion, Cannibal, and Drogon. You know, Drogon grows quicker and larger than Viserion and Rhaegal. Balerion is bigger than the other two dragons, older too, but also huge. So, could be an indication that there is a relation, either a natural relation or a more magical one, where dragons were made from wyverns and fireworms being crossed. But the point is, how did the Targaryens get reptile DNA? Well, obviously it had something to do with blood magic. And we can see that the Valyrians seem to be doing stuff. Okay? But check this out. Then we have to talk about Princess Aerea. And I'm going to read this whole section. It was a dark and stormy night. Get ready. Let me put this... All right, so check it out. Get comfortable. This is going to get freaky here. We have told the world that Princess Aerea died of a fever, and that is broadly true, but it was a fever such as I have never seen before and hope never to see again. The girl was burning. Her skin was flushed and red, and when I laid my hand upon her brow to learn how hot she was, it was as if I had thrust it into a pot of boiling oil. There was scarce an ounce of flesh upon her bones, so gaunt and starved did she appear, but we could observe certain swellings inside her, as if her skin bulged out and then sunk down again, not as if, for this was the truth of it. There were things inside her, living things, moving and twisting, mayhaps searching for a way out, and giving her such pain that even the milk of the poppy gave her no surcease. And by the way, this is the story of Aerea. This is a little girl who accidentally went to Valyria. She's an impulsive little girl. She somehow climbed on the back of Balerion the Black Dread, who was unclaimed at the time, disappeared for weeks, then appeared back at Dragonstone. The dragon has wounds. She's burning up with fever. She's taken to Sept and Barth, and this is Sept and Barth's account of what happened, just to give you the backstory. So we told the king, as we must surely tell her mother, that Aerea never spoke, but that is a lie. I pray that I shall soon forget some of the things she whispered through her cracked and bleeding lips. I cannot forget how oft she begged for death. All the maester's arts were powerless against her fever, if indeed we can call it such a horror by such commonplace a name. The simplest way to say it is that the poor child was cooking from within. Her flesh grew darker and darker, and then began to crack. Let me go just a touch bigger. Until her skin resembled nothing so much, Seven save me, as pork cracklings. Thin tendrils of smoke issued from her mouth, her nose, and even most obscenely from her nether lips. And there's the notorious nether lips, Fire and Blood reference. Excuse me. So, excuse me for multiple reasons. So by then she had ceased to speak, though the things within her continued to move. Her very eyes cooked within her skull and finally burst, like two eggs left in a pot of boiling water for too long. Shout out to the moon that was like an egg that got scalded by the sun. I thought that was the most hideous thing I should ever see, but I was quickly disabused of the notion, for a worse horror was awaiting me. Dun dun dun. That came when Bennifer and I lowered the poor child into a tub, covered her with ice. The shock of that immersion stopped her heart at once, I tell myself. If so, that was a mercy, for that was when the things inside her came out. The things, Mother have mercy, I do not know how to speak of them. They were worms with faces, snakes with hands, twisting, slimy, unspeakable things that seemed to writhe and pulse and squirm as they came bursting from her flesh. Some were no bigger than my little finger, but one at least was as long as my arm. Oh, warrior, protect me, the sounds they made. They died, though. I must remember that. Cling to that. Whatever they might have been, they were creatures of heat and fire, and they did not love the ice, oh no. One after another they thrashed and writhed and died before my eyes. Thank the Seven. I will not presume to give them names. They were whores. Let's see, Balerion had wounds as well. That enormous beast, the Black Dread, the most fearsome dragon ever to soar through the skies of Westeros, returned to King's Landing with half-healed scars that no man recalled ever having seen before, and a jagged rent down his left side almost 9 feet long, a gaping red wound from which his blood still dripped, hot and smoking. So, it's just one horror after another. What possibly could have injured Balerion? That's probably a wild dragon in Valyria is the answer, but we don't know. But the thing about the worms, it says worms with faces, snakes with hands. The sounds they made. So they sound like they have. I called this Dracomorph because this is basically like aliens. I think George is just ripping off the movie Aliens here, essentially. These parasitic worms got in Aerea. They seem to have combined with her DNA, because what is born are these snake worms with hands and faces like a person. So it's the opposite of the babies that the Targaryens have, that are like lizard babies, that are mostly like humans, but they're reptilian. These are reptiles that are a little bit human. So the thing here, the important thing, is that these worms seem to potentially have the ability to combine DNA. And so when we're left wondering, well, how did the Valyrians create human hybrids? Potentially with these parasitic creatures. Yes, the ancestor worms. So you can get into a weird Dune thing here as well, where maybe the Valyrians would take these parasitic creatures and they would do repeated cycles of experimentation and human incubation until you created hybrids that were what you wanted, mostly human with just a little bit of worm or whatever, snake people, etc. So check out the Dracomorph video. I don't want to, there's just lots going on there. I've given you some of the fun and the horror of Dracomorph, but it's like 2.5 hours of this shit. So, and there's also a lot of other little clues and things that you have to put together. Yeah, there's a really great scene. This I will read you. And let me just bring this down. There we go. So the first omen of the dark times, and this is from Fire and Blood. The first omen of the dark times to come was seen on Driftmark, when the dragon's egg presented to Laena Velaryon, and that's the Laena that's going to be in Dance of the Dragons, or in, House of the Dragon. When the dragon's egg presented to Laena Velaryon upon her birth quickened and hatched, her parents' pride and pleasure quickly turned to ash, however. The dragon that wriggled from the egg was a monstrosity, a wingless worm, maggot white and blind. Within moments of hatching, the creature turned upon the babe in her cradle and tore a bloody chunk from her arm. As Laena shrieked, Lord Oakenfist ripped the dragon off her, flung it to the floor, and hacked it to pieces. So this is obviously horrific. Yeah, all of these streams are always available on the YouTube page. Yeah, and Dracomorph is there too. It's in the Great Empire of the Dawn playlist, actually, if you're looking for it. It's the easy way. Or you can just literally, if you just type in Dracomorph in YouTube, you'll find it. So here's the thing. Picture this scene. There's an egg and there's a baby. The worm hatches out of the egg and bites the baby. Now, that sounds just like a scene from Aliens, right? Where the victims are gooed up to the wall, helpless, and then they have the eggs with the face huggers in them. And the face huggers hatch and then plant the eggs, of course, inside the victim, and then the alien, which is like a snake, hatches out of the belly, bursts out of the belly. So if you take this scene and the scene with Aerea and put them together, you've got the entire thing, right? So imagine that the worm that hatches out of this egg and bites Laena is actually one of the worms that got into Aerea. So instead of biting Laena, imagine the worm attacks her and goes inside of her and begins cooking her and incubating a bunch of worms, just like what happened to Aerea. And that would basically be George's version of Aliens, start to finish, carried out with dragons. So there you go. And yes, that's why you don't leave the dragon egg too close to the baby unsupervised. That's why. That is why, folks. That is why. So now we come to the freehold of Valyria, at long last. Valyria proper. We're going to talk about some of their beliefs in politics. How far into the stream are we? I need to go faster. Hour and a half. All right. I figured about 2.5 for the stream. Yeah, so Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that the worm that attacked Valena, or that attacked Lena Valerion, was the same thing as the Aerea worm. I'm saying put the two scenes together in your mind, and you can see how George took a scene from Aliens, cut it in half, and created those scenes. But we don't know. We don't know where the DNA worms come from, if you will. But maybe they. I mean, basically, the idea with the Dracomorph theory is that sometimes the Targaryen babies or the dragons in the eggs regress and show the older DNA of the creatures that they were made from. And that's part of Crowfood's daughter theory. Oh, I'll check the PayPals. Thank you, Guinevere. That's part of Crowfood's daughter's theory about this, which I'm building on. Is that all of these one-off worm babies and deformed dragons are showing you the older, like, worm DNA, essentially. Because the idea is that you cross a fireworm and a wyvern to make a dragon. So let me go ahead and take these PayPals. I think I got one or two at least. So from Jenny, I think the title Fire and Blood tells us what we should be looking at to tell us about the Targ's relationship with the dragons. My thoughts based on Sept and Barth's teachings are that the Valyrians were messing with dragon human DNA. So yes, I saw this earlier and was like, yeah, we're going to get to that. So exactly, that's exactly what is implied. I tried to get specific and explain how it might have happened. Like, obviously there's magic and there's crossbreeding happening, but it's like, well, did George bother thinking about a more specific mechanism, or is he just saying, well, they did something dark and evil that we don't have to know about? Well, these worms might be giving us a clue about how it was done. So with DNA worms, Dracomorph theory, that's it. And by the way, this is the fireworm. The fireworms, of course, live down in the ground. And the slaves that mine the 14 flames of Valyria, sometimes they run into these fireworms. And the fireworms do not seem to be the same as the parasitic worms. But maybe they are. Maybe if the parasitic worms grow large enough, they grow into the fireworms. Okay, yeah, the super chats. Yeah, I'll check the doc. Thank you. Let me see if Albert asked me a question. Nope, that was the gratitude one. Okay, cool. So let's go to the doc. Catch up on some super chats. Melissa Moore. I'll have to wait to work. Or I have to work, so I'll have to wait to watch this. But still like to show appreciation. Thank you, Melissa. And I got O'Reilly and Albert joining the Squishers. Jacob Tarr also joined Squishers. Thank you, Jacob. Mystery Knight says, theories regarding Valyrians genetically creating dragons, but with all this fused stone dating back so far, it's as if dragons existed first. Yes. So that's why I said it couldn't have been the Valyrians who made the dragons. We know that they existed well before Valyria, both from the skeletons and also just from all the fused stone, right? So if anybody made dragons with fireworms and wyverns, it wasn't the Valyrians. It would have been people from the great empire of the Dawn, thousands and thousands of years before the Long Night. However, I've also thought, this is my tinfoil theory, what if the black dragons are engineered? What if they're different? What if they're somehow more powerful and that's what they made? You know, they souped them up with magic or something like that. But I tend to think that dragons were either created a long time ago or they're actually wild. And the experiments come with getting the dragons to be controllable by humans. You know, like I said, either by putting the sacrificed Dragon Lord ghost into a dragon, or by combining the dragon DNA into the people, or maybe both. Yeah, the black dragons are bigger. Like I said, they're bigger. And Balerians, I'm not Balerian, but Drogon sort of keeps to himself. I've just wondered if maybe they're a little something different. Also, the black fire is weird. All the other dragons have like bright, golden fire shot through with a little green or red or something. But the black fire is weird. That's a weird one. Guys, I need a 30-second break. 1 second. I'll be right back. Let me give you some more funky music. Bam, boom, boom, ba-da, boom, boom, ba-da, boom. I hope you guys don't mind me using that twice. But yeah, I needed some water. Please, sir, some water. All right. Oh, that wasn't the cough button. Sorry. Apologies. All right, so the freehold of Valyria proper. Let's put some Dragon Lords up on the screen. There they are. There's our beautiful Dragon Lords. The tradition amongst the Targaryens have always been to marry kin to kin. Wedding brother to sister was thought to be ideal. Failing that, a girl might wed an uncle, a cousin, or a nephew. A boy might marry a cousin, an aunt, or a niece. This practice went back to Old Valyria, where it's common amongst many of the ancient families, particularly those who bred and rode dragons. The blood of the dragon must remain pure, the wisdom went. Some of the sorcerer princes also took more than one wife when it pleased them, though this was less common than incestuous marriage. In Valyria, before the doom, wise men wrote, 1,000 gods were honored, but none were feared, so few dared to speak against these customs. So again, just to back up the earlier point, it's incest. So it's not just a matter of they need to marry other Valyrians or other people that look silver and purple. They practiced familial incest even amongst the great families of Old Valyria. So that tells you it's like it's connected to the family line, which fits very well with the whole lemur ghost sort of theory that I was explaining. As you can see, they're polytheistic. 1,000 gods were honored. They didn't have one specific god. Now, the big clue about this is that we're told that Balerion Vhagar, as she's known, Vhagar, and Meraxes were named after Valyrian gods and goddesses. And Syrax, also named after, step down, a Valyrian goddess. And so if Meraxes and Syrax are the names of Valyrian deities, then you have to assume that probably it's also true of Caraxes, right? Meraxes, Caraxes, Arax, Syrax, Arax. There's Turaxes. Now there's Vermax. So you can see, like, these are probably the names of the Valyrian gods. It's probably, in fact, almost all the dragons are named after Valyrian gods. At least the ones that aren't like Silverwing or Sheep Stealer or the Cannibal. But all these names that sound like Valyrian names, they're probably all named after deities. I don't know why you'd name... I mean, once Aegon and his sisters... Okay, girl. Named their dragons after deities, you'd think that probably became a tradition. And that Syrax being named after a Valyrian god is just keeping in with that tradition. So most of the dragons seem to have these Valyrian names. This is also another hint about the dragon bond. It's like, who were their gods? Well, the dragons. Well, and who were the dragons? Well, actually the spirits of their ancestors, whom they were kin to and descended from. So they worship their own power. They could be the names of emperors. I mean, maybe. That's just speculating, but it could be that the emperors might take names after their gods. But what we know is that the dragons are named after gods. So, yeah. So you can see they're basically worshiping their ancestors. They're worshiping their dragon power. They're worshiping fire and blood. Carmax, Equifax, TurboTax. Love it. Saran wraps. All right. So we've got. Yeah. So right there. What am I saying? Yeah, there were no Valyrian emperors. What are you doing to me? Was that you? Talk Studios. Oh, are you talking about the Gemstone emperors? You must be. I know you don't have bad knowledge. You've got good knowledge. So Valyria, of course, had no kings, as you can see here on the quote. No kings, but instead called themselves the freehold, because all the citizenry who held land had a voice. Archons might be chosen to help lead, but they were elected by the Lord's freeholder from amongst their number and only for a limited time. It was rare for Valyria to be swayed by one freeholding family alone, although it was not entirely unknown either. At its apex, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Within its shining walls, 200, that means 40, rival houses vied for power and glory in court and council, rising and falling in an endless, subtle, oft savage struggle for dominance. The Targaryens were far from the most powerful of the dragon lords. So, essentially, there are all of the landowners are citizens, and they all have a vote. So this is very Roman. That's right. This is essentially kind of like the Roman Senate, with the archons essentially being like the consuls. And we see in Tyrosh, they have an archon. They've only got one, but he is indeed elected for a short period of time by the most wealthy citizens of the city. So it's kind of an oligarchic republic. And the early United States was like this too, whereas only landowning citizens could vote, and men specifically were basically voting for the whole family. So yeah, it's oligarchy, meaning it's only the rich, the landowners who have power, and it's a republic because there is, well, I don't want to get into it, but you see the idea. There's a Senate-like body where they vote, they appoint a temporary leader. So yes, it's loosely modeled off of Rome. Also, it had something similar in Athens, and even in Vedic India, the 16 kingdoms of Vedic India, similar type deal. So this is a form of government that different people have stumbled upon. It's fairly intuitive. So that is the political structure of Valyria. And what I think is interesting, obviously, is a couple things. So the Targaryens, they are a dragon-riding family, but they're not the most powerful. So they're lower down. They may have been one of the 40 families, probably were, because they had dragons. But they weren't going to be the most powerful and prestigious. And the main reason that George wrote that is because the most powerful and prestigious dragon lords probably would never have left Valyria and gone to Dragonstone, which is what he needed the Targaryens to do. So check this out. We'll go back to Dragonstone in a second, but let me go back to, we need to talk about the dating of the founding of Valyria. And let me pop my timeline up on the screen as well. I made a timeline. I'm going to cover up my other stuff so you can see it real big. This is the pre-conquest timeline of Targaryen history. So we've already gone through a little bit of this. 12,000 BC, approximately, the Great Empire of the Dawn. The point is, the Great Empire of the Dawn is just before the Long Night. The Long Night could be 8,000 BC. Maybe it's only 6,000 BC. Maybe it's 10,000 BC. We don't know. It's not that important. I called it 8,000. I put the C there. That means circa. That means approximately. That means save your comments. I mean, leave me a comment, but make sure they're nice. So the Long Night, the Empire of Gis is said to arise basically in the ashes of the Long Night. We also know that Gis is older than Valyria, probably by centuries. And the first firm date we really have is the 5th Giscari War. It says the 5 great wars between the Freehold and Old Gis, when the world was young, are stuff of legend. Conflagrations that ended each time in the victory of the Valyrians over the Giscari. It was during the 5th and final war that the Freehold chose to make sure there would be no 6th war. The ancient brick walls of Old Gis, first erected by Grosdon the Great in ancient day, were razed. The colossal pyramids and temples and homes were given over to Dragonflame. The fields were sown with salt, lime, and skulls. Many of the Giscari were slain, others became enslaved and died laboring for their conquerors. Thus the Giscari became but another part of the new Valyrian Empire, and in time they forgot the tongue that Grosdon spoke, learning instead High Valyrian. So do empires end and others arise. And of course, just to give you an idea what Old Gis looks like, this is Astapor, the Gate of Astapor, and this art is by Mark Molnar. So that's pretty sweet. You can see the harpy there. Of course, Pyramid of Meereen. I've seen this one a lot. This one is by Thomas Vachuda. So these cities in Slaver's Bay are built in the style of Gis, with pyramids, with harpies. So it'll get us close enough to the idea of it. But of course, this happened. It was all given over to the dragons, and they were made slaves. And this is Mark Simonetti. This is the slaves of the enslavement of Old Gis. So it says, here's the thing. The Valyrians learned one deplorable thing from the Giscari, which is slavery. The Giscari, whom they conquered... Oh, and I think I've got more super chats to go through, Minty. I'll go back to that. Don't worry. I haven't completely forgot. Let's see. The Giscari, whom they conquered, were the first to be thus enslaved, but not the last. The burning mountains of the 14 Flames were rich with ore, and the Valyrians hungered for it. Copper and tin for the bronze of their weapons and monuments, later iron for the steel of their legendary blades, and always gold and silver to pay for it all. So this is interesting. The Valyrians learned slavery from the Giscari. They defeated them, they enslaved them, and then they were like, free labor is pretty good stuff. And then they started enslaving other people. So I want to talk about something called the Valyrian Toolkit. And this is essentially what allowed them to conquer. Obviously dragons, but also sorcery, slavery, and magic steel. So they put all these things together, and they became an unstoppable empire. Okay? I've talked a little bit about the Proto-Indo-European stuff on this channel, and a bunch on my other channel, Mythic Concepts, which you should subscribe to, by the way, if you haven't. It's growing fast. You want to get in early with the cool kids. But in any case, Proto-Indo-European, most people at least know that they are nomadic horse people that spread out on the Russian steppe. They went in all directions, kind of. They went into Europe. They went into India. They mixed with all kinds of different people on the way. But they left common genetics and myths and things that you can find in very different places. And then although they've mutated quite a bit, you can find these ancient commonalities because they have this common ancient origin. Isn't that right, Cleo? Cleo always gets excited when I talk about Proto-Indo. Oh, no, they're vacuuming upstairs. That's what it is. There, step down. So the Sintashta were these Proto-Indo-European peoples that really assembled a toolkit. The nomadic peoples that they descended from had always been working with horses. But this one group of horse nomads called the Sintashta, they invented the war chariot for all intents and purposes. And they also domesticated a better horse than people had previously, essentially. Almost all modern horses, or potentially even all modern horses, descend from the ones that they domesticated in this one spot in the Russian steppe. They also had a new kind of bow I was just reading about, a very powerful, more accurate bow. So they domesticated the horse, they yoked the horses to these chariots, and they came up with really good bows and arrows. And they basically just, from there, they were able to spread out and become the dominant force. And when they assembled with new people, sometimes they may conquer them through war. Other times, they would be engaging with trade. And then the people they were trading with would be like, so, those chariots you guys got, those look pretty good. How much gold do you want? So the technology spread even faster, much faster, than the Santashta and then the Andronovo actually conquered. But the point is, if you put together a toolkit that is an advancement over everyone else, a lot of times you will end up conquering or spreading and dispersing very rapidly. And that's what the Valyrians did. They mastered dragons, and then they became ruthless and employed slavery and genocide, really. And that is what they did. So, getting back to the timeline, this last war, the final Giscari War, 5,000 years ago, and Dany talks about it too, 5,000 years ago. So that sounds like an approximate number, but it's approximately close. So we're calling that 4700 BCE, before the conquest, because of course the story takes place 300 years after the conquest. So for Valyria to have already had 5 wars with Gis by that time, I'm guessing that Valyria had to have arisen as a cohesive empire approximately 6000 BC, right? We know it needs to be after, Gis is older, but Valyria needs time to develop and become an empire that can war with Gis 5 times. We don't know how spread out those wars were, but just that's all to say. These dates are approximate, but it's just to give you the order of events. The Long Night, Gis arose right after, Valyria somewhat after that. Then they started warring, and by 4700 BCE, Valyria had wiped out Gis. This is when Valyria begins enslaving people. So there's this big gap in the timeline until they founded a colony on Dragonstone, and we get closer to the conquest and the Doom. The Doom being in 102 BC. In this gap is 5,000 years of slavery and genocide. I just want to make that clear. They depopulated all of Essos. They fed people to their slave mines. They conquered. Here's the map. This is before they conquered the Rhoynar. The Rhoynar are in blue, and the Andals are in green here. But they wiped out the Rhoynar and chased the Andals off the continent. And this was the Valyrian Empire at its height. And this map is from Winter is Coming, by the way, so I had tip to them. It's friggin' huge. I mean, it's just ungodly. And everywhere inside of these lands, they plucked people out of their homes and turned them into slaves. They killed the men. They killed the warriors. They enslaved others. They committed unthinkable atrocities for 5,000 years. I just want to harp on this because it's real important we understand what the Valyrians were up to. Because I believe that the Targaryens were going against this. Because you don't see the Targaryens doing any of the same stuff that the Valyrians do. I'll get to that in a moment. But this is the Valyrian Empire at its height. And let me give you this here. This is, so I want to talk about the cities. Jace says, I've been binging for the last month. I never was able to catch a live. I love the content. Oh, give me the details. Come on. Love the content you post and the community you've built. Unrelated to today's stream, you've got a Mel question. I'll tell you what, Jace. I will take your Mel question. I will answer it in the comments of this video. And then I'll pin it to the top of the comments. So you can see the answer and comment back if you want. Thank you. And let me just check on those other super chats too. Gerald Garcia has a question about Aegon III and the plot to kill the Maesters. He's called the Dragonsbane. I don't think he would have been in on the plot, no. But I haven't gotten to that in my research is the real answer. I am working on part 2 where I'm going through the events. I'll have to research that and get to it. So I don't want to give a... I don't know yet. But I don't think so. I think he would have been like the tool the maesters used to kill the dragons. And so he is the Dragonbane in that, something like that. Okay. Man, they're doing a lot of vacuuming upstairs. It's not that big a house. It's an apartment. All right. Getting it real clean. Secret of Valyrian Steel. Is that what I wanted to do next? I'll come back to that. Okay, so there's a part here where it's talking about the free cities. And it's saying how each of the 9 free cities, like Pentos and Tyrosh and Lys and Myr, they're all founded by Valyria. And so they all speak Valyrian, but each of their tongues has drifted off in different directions or whatever, okay? So let's see here. But this passage gives us some names of some Valyrian cities which I had not found anywhere else, and I thought it was interesting. So it says, at their height before the doom, other cities, such as Montares, Voluntaries, Oros, Tyria, which are all cities that we know. They're on the map. And let me zoom in here. So, like I said, Montares, Voluntaries, Oros, and Tyria. We can see where those are on the map. There's Oros and Tyria right above Valyria. There's Montares at the top of the peninsula. Illyria. We can see where all those. But then it says Dracones, Illyria. Illyria, no, we've seen that one. But Mysa Fair, Royos, and Aquos Dayne. So Dracones, Mysa Fair, and that's the same Mysa as in Dany's nickname Mysa. Royos and Aquos Dayne. These are names of Valyrian cities that I had never read before, and you've probably not heard, so I just wanted to shout those out. So there's 3 cities here around the capital of Valyria that are unnamed, to the east, west, and the south. And there's another unnamed city north and east of Oros. So that's 4 cities. So perhaps those are Mysa Fair, Royos, Aquos Dayne, and Dracones. So there you go. Those are your Valyrian cities, such as they are. If I had asked that on the trivia, nobody would have answered that. I've never heard anybody say those names. Mysa Fair. That's interesting. It's the same word as Mysa. So that means mother something. Interesting. What do you guys think that means? Like fair mother, good mother, something like that? Or something more cryptic? All right, let me put the chat back up on the screen. Aquos. It's Dhaen, but it does look kind of like Dane. You're right. Water Dane. Aquos has got to be a water word, I would think. Yeah, no one really likes to live in Aquos Dane. It's kind of shitty there, to be honest. I mean, it's affordable, but, you know, for a reason, right? All right, so let's see here. Talk Studios, I don't know what you're saying there. The Valyrians were absolutely, definitely slavers. That's not fake history, man. They depopulated an entire continent. They did it for 5,000 years. You can't fake that. Everybody knows they did it. Like, there's a record of that all around the world. Yeah, so I was thinking, yeah, Mysa Fair, maybe that's their first city that they had, like before Valyria. Maybe that's their mother city or something like that. Who knows? Who knows? Authors of fan fiction will speculate. So here's Secrets of Valyrian Steel theory, and this has to do with the map as well. So if we scroll down, we can see that Valyria is pretty close to Nath. That's the Summer Isles in the lower left. And also the Basilisk Isles. And on the Basilisk Isles is Gogassos and the Isle of Tears, but also the Isle of Toads. So, keep that in mind. It says, Maester Pole's treatise on Cohoric metalworking, written during several years of residence in Cohor, reveals just how jealously the secrets are guarded. He was thrice publicly whipped and cast out from the city for making too many inquiries. The final time, his hand was also removed, following the allegation that he stole a Valyrian steel blade. Stop. Come here. According to Paul, the true reason for his final exile was his discovery of blood sacrifices, including the killing of slaves as young as infants, which the Cohoric smiths used in their efforts to produce a steel equal to that of the freehold. So, what does that tell you? We know that the smiths of Cohor are the only ones who can even rework Valyrian steel. They can't make new Valyrian steel, but they can rework it. So Tobo Mott in King's Landing, he melts down ice and makes Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. He's a Cohoric smith. So he knows a secret that other smiths don't. And it seems to be magical. Tobo Mott reeks of magic. But it seems that in Cohor, where they were trying very hard to rediscover the art of making Valyrian steel, they came close. And they were trying to use blood magic. So this is a big clue that Valyrian steel is probably made with blood, human blood sacrifice. And it's probably done in imitation of the Azor Ahai legend, in fact. That's what I think. Because that's what it shows you. The Azor Ahai legend shows you a man making a magic sword by sacrificing his wife to temper the steel. So potentially all Valyrian steel is made in a similar way with blood sacrifice. Now, why can't people reproduce Valyrian steel? Is it just because we don't have dragons? Maybe. But dragon fire really is just fire. So using dragons to forge steel, that just means you're using the dragon fire to melt the steel. Now, the hotter the fire, the more pure the steel is gonna be. So it's possible that Valyrian steel actually isn't even magical. It's just borderline indestructible because it's so pure and so refined. It's such high quality. However, I have a tinfoil theory about that. Clue's going to make me hold her now. That's good. That's workable. I can just use one hand. What if the secret ingredient is oily black stone? Because oily black stone drinks the light. And it's literally so dark that it drinks the light and it looks just creepily dark, okay? That's Valyrian steel. Oily stone is the same. The point is both Valyrian steel and oily black stone have the same description of drinking the light right out of the room. It's a creepy darkness. And here's the thing, if you look at the map, the Isle of Toads, which has a giant toad statue, as pictured... Where is it? Where's my toad idol? I could have sworn I put it in here. Here it is, sorry. We're zoomed in, though. So this is the Isle of Toads. It's got a 40-foot stone idol of a toad. It's made from oily black stone, carved in the shape of a toad. So the oily black stone also found in Ashai, where the first magic swords would have been made. So what if the secret ingredient is the meteorite ore? Because, after all, the sword Dawn was supposedly made from a meteorite, and the oily black stone is either meteorite stone or stone that's been transformed by the meteor impact. Again, check out the Lightbringer series for that entire story. But the point is, maybe, just maybe, the secret ingredient to Valyrian steel is oily black stone, and they would have found it on the Isle of Toads when they went there to take over Gagassos, which they did 5,000 years ago. They took over Gagassos before they destroyed Gis. It used to be a city of Old Gis. So that could be. It could be that they discovered the oily stone on the Isle of Toads and began making steel out of the ore. And that is where Valyrian steel comes from. That is the secret, and that is why nobody can make it, because nobody knows you've got to use the oily black stone. So there you go. Because meteorite ore is mostly iron. King Tut, of course, there's a famous blade in King Tut's tomb that was made out of meteorite ore. So, yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing, folks. Check out the Lightbringer. No, I call it tinfoil because it doesn't really matter for the story. It'll probably never be confirmed. It's just trivia and the lore, but it's cool to think about. So there you go. So Valyria has expanded. They founded the free cities. They wiped out the Rhaenyra. They're depopulating Essos. And it says, with the destruction of the Rhaenyra, Valyria soon achieved complete domination of the western half of Essos, from the narrow sea to Slaver's Bay. And this is this picture. From the Summer Sea to the 14 Flames, to the Shivering Sea, slaves poured into the freehold and were quickly dispatched beneath the 14 Flames to mine the precious gold and silver the freeholders loved so well. Perhaps in preparation for their crossing of the narrow sea, the Valyrians also established the westernmost outpost on the isle. They would come to be known as Dragonstone, some 200 years before the Doom. No king opposed them, and though the local lords of the narrow sea made some effort to resist it, the strength of Valyria was too great. With their arcane arts, the Valyrians raised the citadel at Dragonstone. Then it says, 2 centuries passed, centuries in which the coveted Valyrian steel began to trickle into the 7 kingdoms more swiftly than before, though not swiftly enough for all the lords and kings who desired it. Lords and kings such as the Starks. There's Rickard Stark and Ned Stark with ice. 400 years old, spell forged in Valyria, as Catelyn tells us in the 3rd chapter of A Game of Thrones. So it came from Valyria, just before the Doom. And the way that this paragraph is written, essentially they say, okay, they founded Dragonstone, and then in the next 200 years, Valyrian steel began to trickle into the 7 kingdoms. So you can see Dragonstone was a trading outpost. Valyria set it up, and then they sold Valyrian steel to the 7 kingdoms and made a ton of money. That's what they did. And that's why there's like 400 weapons scattered throughout Westeros, although some of them have been lost. Sorry, guys, just can't clear my throat here. I'm having a rough throat day. So the Doom, but this just tells you what was happening on Dragonstone. And I went into this in the Doom was an inside job video, which I wanted to talk more about, but I'm really running out of time. So I'm going to have to cut the Doom talk short a little bit. But in the Doom was an inside job video, I talked about what Dragonstone would be like. Basically, it was a Valyrian steel emporium. It was a trading outpost to interface with Westeros. That's what it was for. So when the Targaryens came there, they would have been taking over the Valyrian activity on Dragonstone and taking over that trade. And indeed, that's what we're told, is that the Celtigars, the Targaryens, and House Velaryon, we're saying it Velaryon so we can tell them apart, Velaryon and Valyrian, they dominated the trade of the Narrow Sea. So they were set up to do that because that's what Dragonstone was already doing. It's a trading outpost. So that is the economic backdrop for Dragonstone. There we go. So when the Targaryens got there, just before the Doom, there had already been Valyrians on Dragonstone for 200 years, hawking their wares in Westeros. So Westeros wouldn't have even noticed the difference, really. It's just, okay, some different Valyrians are there now. That's how come they sat there for 100 years before they conquered Westeros, and no one really thought anything of it. It's like, oh yeah, well, the dragon people live on the island there. They live on the volcano island, and if you need a sword, that's where you go. That's just, they didn't make trouble with the dragons, so that was that. But then, unexpected to all, and I've also got some other. This is Damon Blackfire by Mike Hallstein on the left, and on the right is Fagon, a.k.a. Trugon, a.k.a. Aegon Blackfire the Sixth. And it's a really nice picture of the sword Blackfire. And that's the same sword in both pictures. The guy on the right is the descendant of the guy on the left. So, there you go. Two of my favorite Valyrian steel pictures. These are basically the four. These two and these two. Just the best Ripley steel, giant sword vibes. I like this one from the TV show in particular. This angle of the sword looks really dark, suitably huge. You can see it, just giant, indestructible swords. Almost makes you think about like a race of giants or something like that, but let's not go there. So the Doom. Dany's the Dreamer, first of all, by Gary Gianni. She saw the Doom. This is sort of a symbolic depiction of Dany's foreseeing the Doom. So it says, no one knows to this day what caused it. Most say it was a natural cataclysm, an explosion caused by the eruption of all 14 flames together. Some Septons less wise claim the Valyrians brought the disaster on themselves for their promiscuous belief in 100 gods. And in their godlessness, they delved too deep, shout out Lord of the Rings, and unleashed the fires of the seven hells on the freehold. Like they just broke through the wrong wall, and then the lava just came roaring through. That doesn't make sense, really. But it is Mines of Moria vibes. So then it says, a handful of maesters influenced by the fragments of the work of Sept and Barth hold that Valyria had used spells to tame the 14 flames for thousands of years, and that their ceaseless hunger for slaves and wealth was as much to sustain these spells as expand their power, and that when at last those spells faltered, the cataclysm became inevitable. This is a major piece of the puzzle. This is almost certainly true. That they were using magic to bank the fires of these volcanoes. Because how else do you have a 5,000-year empire that lives on top of volcanoes that doesn't get blown to bits from time to time? They don't. The long-lasting nature of their empire tells you they had a way of controlling these volcanoes so that they did not erupt. And that makes sense. They're fire mages. So, of course, it probably took a lot of magic and a lot of mages, and probably a lot of slaves. Apparently, they were using blood magic. So that's why they're saying, oh, well, they needed a lot of slaves to basically keep these spells going. So this ties into the idea that the Faceless Men are the ones who caused the doom. They claim it. Like the kindly man straight up says to Aerea that they gave the gift to the masters. But it's a story for another day. They don't go into the detail. But essentially, it's easy to see. And of course, the Faceless Men, just to go back, the Faceless Men started in the mines of Valyria. Come here, girl. And so they essentially, they started as a death cult that was giving the gift of mercy to slaves that were begging for death. But then eventually they became an assassin cult and brought the gift to the masters as well. So how does an assassin cult cause the doom? Well, easy. If these volcanoes are being maintained by a bunch of mages, all they need to do is assassinate the mages. And this is implied in the very next paragraph, but not connected to the Faceless Men. So listen, it says,
Some, wedding the fanciful notion of Valyrian magic to the reality of the ambitious great houses of Valyria, have argued that it was the constant whirl of conflict and deception amongst the great houses that might have led to the assassinations of too many of the reputed mages who renewed and maintained the rituals that banked the fires of the 14 flames. So right there, they're giving us the idea. If someone were to kill too many of the mages, the volcanoes would explode. And they're saying, oh, well, maybe it was the houses fighting civil wars. But it just as easily could have been the Faceless Men, because the Faceless Men said that they did it. And they killed by assassination. So that's the Faceless Men caused the doom theory. Most people believe that. My theory is that Aenar Targaryen worked with the Faceless Men to cause the doom. And I got to watch the video. I'm not going to go into it all today. But essentially, the idea is that, yeah, maybe he had a dream. Maybe Dany's the dreamer had a dream. And this is, by the way, an echo of the legend of the founding of Rome again, where Aeneas flees the fall of Troy after being warned by his cousin, Cassandra. He flees Troy and founds Rome. I think, is he the father of Romulus and Remus? I don't know. Don't sue me. Romulus and Remus are his descendants, if not his children. So he essentially escapes Troy, founds Rome, and it gives Rome this mythical connection to ancient Troy, which is important for their mythology. So here we have Aenar instead of Aeneas, and he's warned by his daughter having a prophetic dream instead of his cousin. So Dany's the dreamer is Cassandra. Pretty easy to see the parallel. Now maybe they had a dream, and maybe they abandoned Dragonstone to the scorn of all the other Valyrian lords, it says, that they were looked down upon and mocked for their decision to leave Valyria. Because Valyria is basically like San Francisco or like New York City. Like, if you're cool, you have to live in the cool part of the city. If you move across the bay, everyone's like, oh, you moved to the South Bay. You moved to the East Bay. Oh, I could never live there. East Bay is just as dope, if not doper, by the way, if you know the Bay Area. But the point is, rich people want to live in the nice place. And in Valyria, you have to live in Valyria. So when the Targaryens moved to Dragonstone, everybody mocked them. Now, there's a financial motivation. Maybe they moved to Dragonstone because it was so profitable. The trade was so good there. Maybe it was a good financial move. Okay? Maybe he helped pull down the Doom so he'd be the only Dragon Lord left. But here's the thing. Aenar Targaryen didn't then try to conquer Westeros. He just sat tight. Okay? So, my theory about all this, essentially, is that inevitably there would arise an anti-slavery dragon lord in Valyria. Over 5,000 years, there's going to be differences of opinion. And there's always some abolitionists. I almost wore a Rage Against the Machine t-shirt today for this. But there's always some abolitionists. There's always some people who want to rage against the machine. Now, there may have been an anti-slavery faction amongst the Senate or whatever. But they obviously were not able to get any reforms passed. The genocide and slavery of Valyria continued for 5,000 years. And really, if you wanted to stop this awful, awful genocidal empire, just literally depopulating continents, how do you stop it? You can't defeat them in war. They have hundreds of dragons. You tried to vote. You tried to get the movement in the legislature, but it didn't happen. So at some point, someone might figure out the only way to prevent another 5,000 years of Valyrian genocide and slavery is to blow up the whole thing, to set off a chain reaction to bring down the entire empire. Slaves and all. Everybody dies. It's the only way. Because there's no other way to stop the Valyrians. Like, think about it. There's no way. So if sooner or later, I'm just figuring the John Brown, okay, if you will, John Brown has got to be born. Somebody that's willing to do very extreme things to end a great evil. Maybe even commit minor evils and crimes in order to stop the greater evil. And so it was that Aenar, John Brown Targaryen, allied with the Faceless Men to help pull off the doom. 12 years after he established himself on Dragonstone. And then what did he do? He came to Dragonstone. He left behind all of the ways of the Valyrians. We don't hear about him enslaving any more people. He brought his slaves from Valyria to Dragonstone, but they probably just became the common folk of Dragonstone, because Valyrian slavery was more like that Roman slavery, as well as the ones that they, like, when it says that Aenar brought his slaves, those weren't slaves in the mines. He didn't pull people out of the mines and bring them to Dragonstone. Those were the slaves of his household. So more like we see in Meereen, where the, your doctors, your educators, your nanny, your gardener, those are all going to be slaves, but they're the upper crust slaves. This is how it was in Roman society. There's also your chattel slaves that are fed to the mines. A lot of times those are criminals, prisoners of war, things like that. And so Aenar Targaryen, he brought his household slaves to Dragonstone, but we never ever hear about slavery on Dragonstone after that. Instead, there's all these common folk on Dragonstone that are dragon seeds, that are descended from, they're Targaryen bastards, essentially. So that means that the slaves that Aenar brought to Dragonstone probably ceased becoming slaves. Slavery is outlawed in Westeros, so really couldn't have kept it up. Now, they don't make any more Valyrian steel, which probably requires blood sacrifice, okay? They do not use dragon horns, which also require blood sacrifice, as we've seen with Victarion. They don't do any human hybrids. We don't hear about Targaryens doing weird blood magic rituals. Visenya might have helped Maegor conceive with magic, but they're not breeding slave women to animals. So basically all of the worst stuff of Valyria, and specifically the genocide and the slavery, is all left behind. And most of the dark blood magic shit is all left behind. So the Targaryens are left with a few swords that they already had, and a couple of dragons that they already had. And that's it. They left all the rest behind. So maybe all these powers were divided. Maybe some people had the horns and some people had the candles. Some people made the steel, and the Targaryens just didn't know how to do any of that. All they had was the war dragons. It says that Targaryen dragons were bred for war. So maybe that's what Targaryen had, is war dragons, nothing else. So when they went to Dragonstone and escaped the doom, that's all they had was war dragons. But maybe, as I honor this 8-month squisher, Michael James, maybe Aenar Targaryen chose to leave all that behind on purpose because he was intentionally trying to end all that shit. That is the theory. That's the short version of it. So check out The Doom Was an Inside Job, and then The Doom Was an Abolition. The moral argument is in the second video, The Doom Was an Abolition. So you got to watch them both. The first one is proving that Aenar did it. The second one is trying to prove why he did it. So Michael James says, was Aegon the First's army that conquered Westeros also of Valyrian ancestry, or were they recruited Westerosi from Dragonstone? So, yes, well, he assembled several lords. It would have been, some of the small folk on Dragonstone would have been, soldiers and knights, but also, like, they allied with several houses before they started conquering. And their army was small at first, so they would not have been of Valyrian ancestry, save for the idea that there are dragon seeds, that there's a lot of dragon seeds on Westeros. It's possible that, like, a few friends came with Aenar. Some of the household slaves may have been part Valyrian as well. There's probably a lot of mixing up there, too. But that's the Doom. It blows up. I'm not going to read the text. My voice is tired. It blows up. All the volcanoes erupt. It rains down dragon glass, obsidian, because that's volcanic rock, lava rocks. The dragons are killed in the sky. The air is burnt. The name Dance of the Dragons actually is not first applied to the Targaryen Civil War. It's first comes from a ballad about two lovers during the Doom. That is the original Dance of the Dragons. And so it was repurposed as the name for a war. Originally, it was a ballad. And so that is this picture here, as well as this picture. And this one is just HBO lore. I don't know who the artist is. This one is by Tim Durning. And this is called The Dance of the Dragons. It's named after the ballad. Because Tim Durning has good knowledge, apparently. He's the one that did the Azor High Nissa Nissa picture that I use a lot also. So there you go. There's a really cool quote from the kindly man in Bravos talking to Aerea, where he's talking about the red darkness of the mines. And it really communicates how horrible it is. The slaves toiled in an oven. The rocks around them became too hot to touch. The air stank of brimstone and would sear the lungs as they breathed it. The soles of their feet would burn and blister, even through the thickest sandals. Sometimes when they broke through a wall in search of gold, they'd find steam instead, or boiling water, or molten rock. Certain shafts were cut so low the slaves could not stand upright but had to crawl or bend. And there were worms in that red darkness too. So it's just claustrophobic and horrible. That's the point. George wants you to know this is the worst you can imagine. The worst. Slave mines. Like it's a term for a reason. So these are hot slave mines. And they don't care how long you live. If you die, they just shove your body into the lava and put another slave down there. They don't care. So that's how it is. And that's why you could see some of them would be begging for death, and that death would be a mercy in those situations. So that is about it. Yeah, so when we get to House Targaryen, like I said, the Dragonstone is established 200 years before the Targaryens come. And sometime in the middle, House Valyrian is formed. And I just want to repeat this, that I mentioned this in the why, Corlys is Black is a good idea video, which it seems like most of you have watched that one. But I talked about the name Valyrian, and this is another one I brainstormed with Minty. The name Valyrian is so generic. It sounds like Valyrian. I should say Velaryon. Corlys Velaryon. It sounds like Valyrian. So perhaps the first Velaryons were people from Valyria who didn't even have a house name. They might have been very lowborn and probably sailors and traders and things like that. And when they came to Driftmark, the locals probably just called them the Valyrians. Like, oh yeah, the Valyrians, that encampment on the other side of the island, the Valyrians, they came from Valyria. And over time, that became House Velaryon. So that is what I think. I do not think there was a house in Valyria called Velaryon. That would just be confusing. So just wanted to repeat that. Yeah, and maybe Targaryen had friends in House Velaryon, and they were like, yeah, come to Dragonstone. It's great. It's a great place. The next island over, there's like nobody there. I mean, yeah, it's a volcano, but you guys are dragon lords. You'll love it. The dragons will, they'll roost in the volcano. They'll be happy. It'll be perfect. And Aenar was like, what? There's a volcano? That's perfect. I'll be right over. So yeah, that kind of makes sense, actually. We've all got that friend who bought a house in some small town, and they want to get their other friends to move there. And they're like, oh yeah, the house next to me just went on sale. It's perfect. It has a pool. So there you go. Have I analyzed any mythical astronomy in Fire and Blood? Yes. Check out the dragon dances. Why can't I remove this? There we go. Check out the dragon dances stream. I went through every dragon battle in Fire and Blood and broke down all of the symbolism. So yeah, that's definitely there. So, yeah, I think I'll go ahead and wrap it up there because my voice is way done. And the Warriors game is in like 20 minutes. Woo! So there you go, guys. There's 2.5 hours of Valyrian history, everything that comes before House Targaryen. And now when you see Damon and Rhaenyra riding around on dragons, you'll know where all this comes from. Ashai, Valyria, weird blood magic experiments, Gagassos, all kinds of weird detours on the way to creating House Targaryen. But just to finish up on the Doom idea, so if the other cool thing about it is, if Aenar Targaryen has committed the Doom as an abolition to end the slave empire of Valyria, well then Dany using her dragons to free slaves in Slaver's Bay is more of the same. It's you can see House Targaryen as course correcting from Valyrian. So first Aenar Targaryen ends Valyrian genocide, leaves behind all of their blood magic, and then 400 years later, Dany comes along and cleans up the slavery in Slaver's Bay that goes back to Valyria, who conquered Slaver's Bay. So it's very, very closing the loop, and that's one of the things I like about the Doom was an inside job theory. All right, folks, thanks. Happy Sunday. Go Warriors, and I will see you. I'm going to have an Alicent video out for you on Wednesday, so that's all I'm going to say. It'll be a surprise. And part 2 of the Maester Conspiracy will be in a week and a half. 2 weeks it was going to be, and then it turned... Oops, I don't want to flick you off. Oh, gosh. I'm just going to end the stream. Okay, guys. Yes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I love you all. And yeah, the Doom was an inside job. Part 2 will be in a week and a half. There you go.